I'm not too worried about the world economy when it comes to supply demand of silver. On the supply side, we're flatlined. Um, the mining sector has kind of reached its limits on how much silver it can produce. Even if a couple of, like, for example, Pan American, they've got a couple of mines in abeyance that they're hoping for permits on, and I think one is a potential 15, 20 million ounce producer, and another one's around the same size. But they're, years into the future and so on and so forth. But, you're in a 850 million ounce market, at least the mining sector supplying 850 million ounces of silver a year. So one mine here, 20 million ounces, or another, there, it makes virtually no difference to the supply side of the equation. I suppose if silver prices went to $100 an ounce, you might see a bunch of recycling come in. We did see peak recycling in 2011. We saw peak recycling at 250 million ounces of silver. Today, it's about 125 million ounces of silver, and it seems to be flatlined at that level. Some people, silver went to $50, so and a whole slew of silver came into the marketplace from recycling. On the demand side, it's pretty phenomenal. You have a market there where last year 1.2 billion ounces of silver was consumed. That's like crazy. That's up 20% from the previous year. The estimate for 2023 is something in the order of 1.4 billion ounces of consumption. You've got the auto sector, just screaming along, absorbing as much as they can, and of course the photovoltaic solar panel industries. You've got two industries: solar panels about 160 million ounces, automobiles about 80 million ounces. So it's like 250 million ounces between those two industries, which didn't exist a decade ago for really any large degree, consuming almost 30% of the entire mine supply of silver. I don't know why more people don't catch on to this, because there's 1.2 billion automobiles on the surface of the earth today. That's all automobiles worldwide. And last year, the automotive sector produced, I think, about 80 million cars worldwide, of which about 10%, call it 8 million, even call it 10 million. It wasn't that big. It was more like 7 or 8 million cars were electric. The governments want to eliminate all fuel cars by 2030, 2035, 2040, some say. The automotive sector can't produce the amount of electric cars required to replace all the fuel combustion cars. So over that period of time, and if we're producing, as a global industry, the automotive industry, producing, call it 9 million fuel or electric cars last year, consuming 60 million ounces of silver, you do the math. In an 850 million ounce market, and you want to, and the automotive sector needs to be producing 50 million cars a year over 20 years just to replace the current fleet. So you multiply those numbers out and you basically have no silver left. I think the United States is quite unique. I think, last count, at least what I'm aware of, is that there's about 6,000 regional banks in the United States. That's very different than Canada, and quite different than Europe, where it's very concentrated. I think in Canada there might be 5 banks, maybe a couple of smaller ones, but 5 major banks. And these banks, do regional loaning, and often, high net worth people have their own account managers, and then they report through, the system into Montreal or Toronto, wherever the head offices are, where all the decisions get made. And that's just the way it is in Canada. In the United States, it's, as you know, it's very different. It's led by these regional banks where high net worth, and well, not just high net worth, but all, regional individuals, have their, banking relationships with local banks. And then they're quite small in nature. And if they, are not investing their capital well, and as the case has turned out, as the case has turned out in this one particular bank, yeah, things happen. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day, and will we see in the United States whereby you only have 4 or 5 banks left? We all know that the United States is home of most of the biggest high tech companies in the world, and well, many of the largest corporations in the world, whether it's Boeing or General Motors, or you have it, and is that related to their banking system or not? It's hard to say. In Canada, we've seen some big corporations come and go over the years. Canadians, I think, are quite entrepreneurial, and there's lots of successful Canadians who build large businesses, but not to the point of Americans. And I don't know really the cause of that. As I said, it would be an interesting study whether it is related to their banking system, because it is quite different than here in Canada. We've been using digital currencies, for most of our lives. But when you don't have any other option, and that's what CBDCs really, give you, is no other option. And that's what I don't like. If you want to use an electronic transaction at wherever, at Walmart, then okay, fine, that's your choice. But if you want to use cash for a transaction, that should also be your choice. And unfortunately, the direction is to eliminate that choice, which I think is not a good thing. Having your funds maybe spread over multiple bank accounts, not just having all your eggs in one basket. Possibly have different trading platforms. I'm not so much worried about having this, a stock portfolio, for example, taken away. I think those shares are yours, and they're electronically deposited. If the bank goes bankrupt, I couldn't expect those shares would just disappear. They're registered at, the big trust companies, and they're quite separate from the banking system. But cash in itself, that's really where the risks have been. And yet we've seen in the United States that there's actually no risks, to have deposits. I think, gold and silver, you have to have some physical gold, you have to have some physical silver, mining shares, and then just be diverse among, where you're banking. Well, interestingly enough, I think there's a lot of interest in exploration companies, and I think this has been going on for really the last couple of years, and you'd have to go back to probably 05, 06 to really see, the kinds of interests that we see today in exploration. I remember there was a bit of a glimmer in 09 as well, but the investing public has really, over the last decade, has focused on developers. Ounces in the ground. When can these ounces get produced, and when are you going to become a mining company? When are you going to actually have revenues? We're not going to buy you unless you have revenue.